Hey everybody, so in this video I wanted to talk about some tips for how to use actor areas effectively in maps. So we'll jump straight into an example here. So the map we're looking at right now is called a centering. So basically players start on an elevated ring, which is very sparse wood, and down lower is a bunch of very dense jungle with some extra resources. So the way this map is created, it's basically made with a land pattern. So if you have a tool such as Madlands, you can create a land pattern of many individual lands, and this particular one has a radius of 33, and that's what this chunk of code is representing, that land pattern. And then at the end of the land section, we have the player lands, which are specified at the same radius 33 as the land pattern we'd specified in Madlands, with a small bit of variance. So that seems simple enough, but we have to keep in mind that when we have many neutral lands which are in very close proximity to the player lands, that can kind of screw up the way player objects can work. So let's try this. So let's go into the objects section, and we'll comment out the vast majority of it. So right after we create the first objects, town center, villagers, and scout, we will create an object flag A. We will place on specific land ID 1. And if we notice above that every individual land in our land pattern has that land ID of 1, so it's basically going to create one flag for each of those lands. And we're going to say max distance to players is going to be 0. So this is basically going to indicate where all of the origins of the neutral lands are going to be. So let's restart. So now we can look at our map and we can see that there has been a flag placed at each of the origins of the neutral lands. So now the next thing I'm going to show is we're going to create some flags for the players also. So I'm going to say create flag A. Number of objects is going to be very many. Instead of place on specific land ID, we're going to set place for every player. And then the min and max distance will be the same distance as the villagers are. So we would expect to basically draw a box around the TC with flags. Since we know that the min and max distance represents squares, it should create a box. So let's see what that does here. So we can see something pretty odd here. So instead of creating a box that was basically around the TC, we can see it's only a partial box, and the player flag objects are not being able to spawn near these neutral flags here, which are representing the neutral lands. And that has to do with one of the rules of object placement. So when we have objects that are referenced to an origin, when I'm referring to being referenced to an origin, that means the object contains the attribute either place on specific land ID or set place for every player. That means that min distance to players means min distance to all land origins, not just the land origin it's referenced to. So since the flags that we created for the players are origin referenced, they are set place for every player, the min distance to players not only applies to the origin of the player land, but it applies to all of the neutral land origins as well. So the flags have to stay at least 6 tiles away from this flag, and this flag, and this flag. And that's basically really limiting the area in which our objects are able to spawn. And if we scroll down, we can see that very many of our object statements have this sort of phenomenon going on. We have set place for every player and min distance to players in the same object statement, and that can really hinder the placement. So if we were to uncomment the rest of this, let's take a look and see if there are any resources missing. So let's see, we have one pile of gold for this player here, but if we take a look into our code for the primary player gold, we see that we're supposed to have two groups. So this sort of thing is actually hindering us from placing the correct number of objects on our map, and that's actually a pretty big deal. So in order to get around this, we can use actor areas instead of using min distance to players attributes. So I'm going to bring back the player flags for a bit because it's going to help demonstrate what I'm trying to get at here. And then at the beginning of the object section, I'm going to create an off-grid object. So constant off-grid is going to be 647. And then at the beginning of the object section, I'm going to create that off-grid object, set place for every player. Max distance to players is going to be 0, so it will spawn right at the center of the player lands. Give it an actor area, which is going to be 6, which is going to match the argument of the min distance to players attribute that we would be replacing. And the actor area radius is going to be 5 in this case. Now let me explain why it's 5 instead of 6. So when we have a min distance to players attribute, this basically means that the closest that the object will be able to spawn is the 6th tile away from the origin. And in contrast, we have the actor area here, which means if we were avoiding radius 5, it cannot spawn in radius 5, which means the 6th tile would be the closest it would be able to spawn towards the origin. So if we were to copy this statement and say we have flag B instead of flag A, and then instead of flag B being min distance to player 6, we will avoid actor area 6. Let's see what that does for us. So we can see two things at play here. So first is the fact that flag A and flag B are at the same distance away from the TC, which is a good demonstration of why our actor area radius is always going to be 1 unit less than the min distance to players value that we would be replacing. And also notice that flag B is able to go all the way around the town center without being hindered by these neutral flags, whereas flag A, as we saw previously, is going to be affected. So if we were to put more actor areas here and give them different radii, we could basically remove this issue in which these min distance players attributes are causing us problems. So let me go over to the official map, and then I'll copy over the objects that are going to be representing the different actor areas, and I'll paste these in first. And then systematically, I'll go through and replace the min distance to players attributes where it would be better to have an avoid actor area statement instead. So avoid actor area 6 here, avoid actor area 8 here. We will get rid of these flags. Same goes for here, since these are also origin reference being set place to every player. We'll replace the gold and the stone. And I won't bother replacing the extra gold because this is not an origin referenced object. You can see it does not contain a set place for every player attribute. Do the same with the llamas. The jaguars do not have a set place for every player attribute, so I'll leave those alone. The forage bushes, the javelinas, and then the deer and our straggler trees here all have a set place for every player attribute, so we will replace the min distance players with an avoid actor area of a certain radius. So let's restart and we will take a look, and our objects should be able to spawn a bit better now. So in contrast to what we looked at first, we are now able to successfully generate 2 piles of gold per player, as opposed to we were able to just spawn 1 at first. So that's one of the uses for actor areas that I wanted to go through, and I believe I talked about that a bit previously, but I wanted to mention it again because A, it's pretty important, and B, it kind of translates well into what I wanted to talk about next. So the next example I wanted to go through is a bit more basic, and as we go through its code, I want to pay attention to attributes of objects in the sense that whether they are origin reference generically placed, because that actually has a significant effect on how the actor areas can work. So let's take a look at the code for this map here. So we have just basically player lands and a big dirt land in the center. So we have some road terrain generated on this dirt, and we have some flags that are created both on the dirt and the road, and that's what we are looking at here. So I put together a list of rules and guidelines for actor areas, and I think I'll just go through these one by one and demonstrate those. So the first one I wanted to go over is that different objects can be assigned to the same actor area. So for example, we have the flag A that's being placed on dirt has actor area 1 and a given radius. And then the flags that are placed on the road terrain have the same actor area and the same radius. And now if we wanted to place an object in that actor area, say create object relic, say number of objects 9, actor area to place in is going to be 1. Let's see what that does. So we can see that the relic objects are not restricted to one terrain or the other, since actor area 1 comprises of both the terrain road and the terrain dirt. We can place it on either of those terrains because those actor areas can share the same ID. So let's go over the next tip, which is do not place origin referenced objects in generic actor areas. So by origin referenced, I mean either reference to player or reference to a specific land ID. So let's go into a demonstration. So right now, the scout for every player starts very close to their TC. And I want to change it so that the scout will spawn very close to the middle, and I wanted to place it in near these flags, which are comprising the actor area. So let's do that. So instead of the min-max distance, we'll say find closest, then actor area to place in 1. Let's get rid of these relics for now. So let's restart and see what happens. So when we generate our map, we can see that there's only one player in the game who has the scout in the correct place. And for all of the other players, the scout fails to spawn completely. And so that violates the rule that I basically stated here, is that when we place player objects in generic actor areas, we can run into problems. So we'll go on to the next couple rules, which are placing generic objects or placing player objects into land ID referenced actor areas will always work. So let's try that. Let's give the middle land a land ID, and we'll have these actor area objects be placed on specific land ID. So now the objects that are comprising actor area 1 are now referenced to an origin, which is land ID 1. Let's see if that changes anything for us. And indeed, in contrast to what we saw previously, whereas only one player was having a scout spawning in the correct place. Now every player in the game is having the scout spawn in the correct place, and that's all because we switched the actor area objects from being just a generic actor area to an origin referenced actor area with this attribute place on specific land ID 1. So that takes care of that, and then let's go on to the next tip, which are only player objects should be placed into player referenced actor areas. So let's go and bring back the relics that we had earlier. So we have our relics here, and I'm going to move them towards the bottom here because I want to place them in an actor area that's defined by the player's town center. So if I put an actor area around the player's TC, give that actor area 2, I'll give it radius 10, and instead of actor area to place in 1, I'll say actor area to place in 2. So now we're trying to place a generic object into a player referenced actor area, and we'll see what happens. So based on what we had written in the code, we would expect relics to spawn within 10 tiles of the player TCs, but as we can see, no objects were placed at all. And that's where this rule comes into play, is that if we're trying to place objects into player referenced actor areas, then those objects must be player referenced themselves. So let's move on and try something else. So let's go back, and instead of referencing it to actor area 2, we'll go back and reference it to actor area 1, which is still up here where the flags are. So the next tip is when placing generic objects in generic actor areas, so that's essentially what we're going to have here, is that these flags are no longer referenced to land ID 1, and these relics are no longer referenced to any origin. We have a generic object that's being placed in a generic actor area. Try to have the fewest create object commands between the actor area creation and the object to be placed in it. Because what can happen is that if we have multiple create object commands in between where we define the actor area versus when we place the object inside, it can kind of screw things up a bit. Because previously when we had the relics up here earlier in the script, we already saw that that worked, but it's not working now that all these player objects are in between the creation of the actor area and the object being placed in it. And if we were to, for example, move the flags down so that they are created after the player objects, we'll see what happens. So that happened. So the order of objects matters quite a bit when we are trying to place objects in actor areas. I have no idea why that's the case, but that's basically the way it is. So try to have the fewest create object commands between the actor area creation and the object to be placed in it. And then finally, the last tip is that when none of the other rules can be satisfied, we can use what I like to call inverse actor areas as a failsafe. So let's take the script back a bit, and we'll try to place the relics inside actor area 2 instead of actor area 1, which was very close to the player town center. So we already know this isn't going to work because we tried it before, but what I mean by an inverse actor area is just this. If we have an actor area which is defined, actor area 2 is around the player's town center. Let's create some other objects. We'll call it flag B instead of flag A. Temp min distance group placement is going to be 3, and it's going to avoid actor area 2, which is represented by the player's town center. It's going to have an actor area itself, which is going to be actor area 3 with a radius of 3. And then when we're trying to place the relic, since basically flag B is going to be spawning everywhere except around the player's town center, instead of actor area to place in, we can tell the relic to avoid actor area 3. And we can see what that looks like when we test. So basically what we have done is we have created flag B everywhere except the area around the player's town centers, so that when we tell the relic to avoid actor area 3, which are these flags, it has no other place to go than close to the player town centers. And we can see where the relics are spawning here. So that's what I mean by inverse actor areas, and they can always be used as a failsafe if none of these other rules above can be satisfied. So hopefully this isn't all too confusing, because we're going to be moving into a bit more practical example now. So the map we're looking at here is Silk Road. So the way the map looks, players are divided by team with the road running down the middle of the map. And at the edges of the road are these Gaia markets, which are indestructible and which players can trade with. Instead of normal scouts, players start with a couple trade cards, which they can use to explore the map and or trade with the markets if that's what they want. And all of the extra gold and stone are very close to the middle here. And that's basically how the map looks. And when we're thinking about how we can place these markets very precisely on the edges of the map here and here, we have to be aware of the rules and actor areas, because in addition to that, not only are we going to be placing markets there, but since the edges of the map are areas that the players are probably not going to explore very soon, I want the markets to be explored from the start of the game, but not necessarily revealed for the entire time. So let's get to work and see what we can do to make this happen. So I have removed the beginning of the objects section, except for the objects that we will be using. So let's first consider how we would get an object to spawn very close to the edge of the map. So let's just say if we had an object spawn right in the middle here, and if we gave it an actor area, of course that actor area is represented by a box, so we could force objects to stay away from that actor area, which would end up being very close to the edge of the map. So that object we will create is going to be a pagoda. So we'll say create the pagoda, place on specific land ID 1, which is defined up above here as the water terrain that we're looking at right here. So it will spawn right in the middle of that, and we will give the pagoda an actor area, and its actor area radius is going to be dependent on the map size. So if we have map sizes here, just copy this over here. Let us say this is going to be actor area radius is going to be half the map's length minus 5 tiles. So we'll say whatever that is, divided by 2, and subtract 5. So if that's true for all of these here, we should be able to have our variable actor area radius. So we'll paste that in over here. So if it's a tiny map, then the actor area radius is going to be 55. If it's a small map, 67, medium map, 79, and so on. And if we were to place any objects that avoid actor area 1, they would be within 5 tiles of the edge of the map. So if we want to create our Gaia market, this is going to be the Gaia market, which is object 1646. We can say number of objects is going to be 2. We're going to avoid actor area 1. We want these to be sufficiently far enough away so that they won't spawn on the same edge, they will spawn on different edges. So we'll give it a temp min distance group placement of 25. And then we want to place it on the, let's call it the dirt. So we'll say place on terrain to place on dirt. And then we must set Gaia object only and set Gaia unconvertible so that it will remain neutral throughout the whole game and a player won't be able to capture it. So let's see what that does for us here. So if we look at the edge of our map here, we can see that it placed that market on the dirt over here, and it ended up very close to the edge of the map here, and the same goes for this side. So that works. Now let's try and think about how we could possibly create some flares on top of the market to explore that area around so that players are aware that those markets exist. Now, if we consider that the object that we are going to create is a flare, which is object 112, which reveals a portion of the map at the start of the game, but then the visibility goes away after a couple seconds. So if we place many of those objects for each player around the market, then that could work. So if we give the market an actor area, let's call that 2. Actor area radius is going to be, let's say, 3. We could try to place some of these flares in that actor area, and we'll see what happens. So we will create object, which is actually supposed to say flare. Let's create the flares. We'll make a couple of objects here. We're going to set place for every player, and then we're going to say actor area to place in is going to be 2, which is representing the market over here. So let's restart and see what we can find. So we are now looking at our map with the Fog of War enabled, and we can see that even though these markets are here, they're not being revealed to the players. And that has to do with the fact that we are trying to place player objects into a generic actor area, which is basically violating this rule here, which we're not supposed to place player objects in generic actor areas. And the issue here is that we cannot modify this object into being a land ID referenced object, which could work because of the fact that this middle terrain here is restricted for buildings, so there would be no way to place that market past this area because of the restricted terrain. So, since none of the rules can be satisfied in that case, we will try using the inverse actor area as a failsafe. So let's go back to the map, and then let's create some invisible off-grid objects. This will be many objects, which will be Gaia objects. Set scaling to map size. We will have a temp min distance replacement of 2. It will avoid actor area number 2. Basically, it's going to spawn everywhere except this Gaia market. And then it will have an actor area itself, which is going to be actor area 3 with a radius of 2. So instead of having the flares being placed in actor area 2, we'll have those avoid actor area 3, because these off-grid objects are basically going to be spawning everywhere except around the markets. So that's one way to make this work, by using the inverse actor area method, in which case, because none of the other rules of the actor areas could be satisfied. And just to be thorough, we can even try this a different way. So what I'm going to do is that instead of generating the Gaia market right away, I will generate a placeholder or an anchor point for which the markets can be referenced to. So I will say place object, instead of the Gaia market, we'll place an off-grid object, basically almost in the same place. It's going to have the same number of objects. It's also going to avoid actor area 1, but I want it to instead reference it to land ID 1 and find the closest point to it in which it can still be placed on dirt. We'll get rid of these attributes here, and just for debugging purposes, we'll put a second object flag A on it to show where that's going to be spawning. So these flags are basically representing where the anchor points for our markets. So then if we go and do something else, which is to create the Gaia market next, create the Gaia market, we want to have two objects which are apart from each other by a little bit. We want to say actor area to place in, which is going to be 2 in this case, because that's going to be where the flags are. And we must say set Gaia object only, and then set Gaia unconvertible also. We get rid of these over here. So let's see what happens in this next step. So we can see that we have been able to successfully place our markets around the flag, because that's basically one of our rules here, is that we can always place generic objects into land ID referenced actor areas. So we can see that the Gaia market was a generic object, not referenced to any land or player, but these flags that are comprising our actor area, those are referenced to a specific land ID, and that's why we were able to place those Gaia markets around those flags. And then in a similar fashion, we can also place player objects into any land ID referenced actor area. So if we instead try to place the flares in this actor area 2, this should work now. Actor area to place in 2, and we'll get rid of the flag because we don't need to debug it anymore. See, that works in a pretty similar way. So yeah, so this is just one of those examples in which knowing the rules of actor areas can greatly assist you in the way of creating interesting maps. So hopefully you've learned something with this video. I know I certainly have when making it. And yeah, thanks for watching.